I'm sure you said a whole bunch of glowing things, but I did not hear anything that you said. And once again, you have not learned from last week.
You keep missing a cue. You're supposed to just jump in and say, "Welcome to the Roundtable Console."
When your
Oh my
mouth is moving,
gosh.
I don't want people to be confused.
When your mouth is moving, most people are confused. Anyhow, welcome to the Roundtable Console. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Williams, and I'm still joined by my wonderful co-host, Attorney Sonia Madison. Sonia, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. One of the things we didn't get to talk about last week was Kiki Palmer and I guess, situation that has come out that she filed a temporary restraining order against her boyfriend, who is also the father of her child. And and I'm sure you remember we kind of brought this up a few weeks ago
I heard
when,
dressing all skanky.
yes, with
Yes.
Usher.
Uh,
But she took them back and said, hey, definitely her prerogative. But now we're hearing that there are domestic violence incidents, and she's has submitted pictures along with her request in the restraining order. And it's gonna get into our topic because grief is in so many forms. It's not just about the death of a person. It could be about the end of a relationship. And I'd imagine, especially when you have a child with someone, to have to grieve whatever ideal you had of what that family was going to look like, in addition to then grieving having the fact that you still have to co-parent with this person. It could be a process.
I don't know. You wonder if people in popular culture today really grieve relationships. Who's like Steve Harvey's daughter was like
Yeah,
every
that's it.
year
She
she switched.
recently broke up with her.
But she's been dating person after person. She dated what, P. Diddy and his son, or his son then him. And it's like 1 year cycles. That's what you do, is you date them for 1 year, you break up, and then I don't know, maybe you just like the breakup part. It's kind of like my brother, who just likes getting married, so he does it over and over again. So
Well, and I was
that's
gonna
where
say maybe it's a different take based on your gender, because I'd imagine still, at least for me, there's still that grief of, man, I have poured into this person. I have shared a lot of stuff about me and hopes that it will get somewhere, and it doesn't, and you have to go through this process all over again.
yeah.
To be, and there's a little bit of grief in that, but I can understand from a male perspective, it's like whatever.
Oh wow. So we just
I
took it
mean,
to the
you
whole
you
gender,
suggested
huh?
it, so I'm just
We
saying
just
maybe it perceives its way differently based on the gender.
I was giving you an opportunity to slap my hand for saying something that was insensitive, and you didn't take it. Because the reality is that we really shouldn't be trying to estimate the impact of somebody's grief, and it's a horrible thing to do, is to say, well, what, you don't appear like you're grieving or something like that. So yeah, those relationships, hopefully those relationships that people are entering into are genuine relationships, and things that require and give a lot of energy, that people, when they've spent that, over a period of time, you want some return on that investment, because being in a relationship requires a lot of energy, frankly. Unless, of course, you're married to me, and then it's all
Oh,
daisies
the
and
energy is
lilies.
still there.
Yeah, it
A
is,
lot of
but
sacrifice, a lot
it's
of
self-generating. It's self-generating. What are you talking about? I don't know what you're saying. I don't know what you mean. The energy comes from on high. But anyhow, it's been a very interesting week. I got a chance to take a vacation, and we did enjoy just relaxing. Haven't quite fully got rid of this cough yet, so if it still comes, then you'll understand why. But uh, but I'm excited today. Is there anything else we need to talk about, that we
Well, I know
haven't?
we've been wanting to make sure we have some points on thankfulness. And I will say, and this is my perspective, I'm not a clinical psychologist or have any training, as unlike the person that we have as our guest. But I'd imagine sometimes you grieve because you loved. And one of the things that I'd imagine we want to highlight in our Thanksgiving is thankful that we are able to love, thankful that God has put people in our lives and our situations that remind us how blessed it could be to have those relations with people that are loving relationships. And when you find that, then for whatever reason, whether that's a death or, a change or for whatever, that relationship ends, even though there's grief in that, hopefully there's a thankfulness in having had that relationship.
Yeah, and I know it seems like a down topic to have the week before Thanksgiving, but this is a real issue. People are going through this even during this time of the year. It's a seasonal thing. This is a season where I think a lot of people, and our guests will probably get more into that, but where people suffer a lot and they don't really want to be around family because it reminds them of the things that they lost. But I like the perspective that you had. In order to grieve something, that which was lost had to have had some value for you. And it's a good time to actually remember and be thankful for the value that thing or that person has brought for you. So I want to bring in our guest. She's no stranger to this show. She has been here several times before, and anytime we need some advice on mental health, and even personally for Sonia, with her schizoaffective disorders and other things of that. I'm just kidding. but and shouldn't joke about people who have mental health issues, but it's real. But we're grateful that Sonona Williams, she's a licensed professional counselor. She always comes on with us and helps us to tackle some of these topics that neither Sonia or I have the experience in dealing with. So I want to welcome to the show Sonona Williams.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Hey, can we see your face?
Well, yeah, I think Sonia can. I think you were delayed.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
there you go.
Your video keeps freezing up on you.
Oh, wow. It is.
Sonona, as we get into the topic of grief, well, first of all, can you kind of define what grief means? Because I know a lot of people probably associate it with just a death, but it could be in so many different forms. So from your perspective, what is grief?
I was listening to you earlier, and you're right. Grief is not just death, right? We grieve the loss of relationships. If we break up with somebody, you can experience grief if you move across the country or move to another country. So kids experience grief when they move from one school to another and they don't have the friends that they had. So grief is really the loss of someone or something that was very important to you. And so death is what most of us are most familiar with. We're like, okay, we're grieving the loss because that person is physically not here with us anymore. But it can be a loss because they're physically here on earth, but they're just not connected to us anymore because of a move, a breakup or whatever it may be. And so grief is just dealing with the loss of someone that you care about.
Well, and in that vein, I don't know if do you recommend processing grief or if there's a recommendation to just get over grief, but how, in terms of your counseling, what is it that you tell people when they're experiencing grief, how to deal with it? Do they process it or do they, figure out a way to move on from it?
You have to process it. There is no moving on from it. Grief is getting used to a loss, and you never get over that loss. You learn and adjust and create a new normal and how you move through life. So I always laugh when people say that, like, well, how long do I have to grieve, or when will this get over? Okay. Never. You're going to experience that loss. You're going to carry it with you. It may not be as intense, years down the line as it was immediately. And especially when we're thinking about death, you never get over the loss of that loved one. You carry them with you, but the intensity of that pain lessens because your normal has changed as you go through. But even if it's a breakup of a relationship, you grieve the loss, you gradually change and adjust to not having that person around. So yeah, you have to process it. But for most of us, we don't want to, because we don't like to deal with pain. We don't want to deal with the hurt. We want to just put a Band-Aid over it, pretend that it's not still oozing, and move on with life. But then it hits us when we least expect it. You're standing somewhere or you hear something and all of a sudden you're overwhelmed with a bunch of emotions because you haven't dealt with them before. You just keep trying to stuff them.
Mm-hmm. So, actually, I used to be a funeral director and embalmer, and so one of the things that we learned in terms of our grief, and this was decades ago, so some of the teaching and some of the knowledge might be outdated. But one of the things that we understood that there are certain rituals that take place that help facilitate grief, and the funeral itself is even one of those things. I know there's certain cultures who will prescribe a certain set of activities, not to say, hey, I'm going to move you along in grief, like you sit shiva for 7 days or something after somebody dies. If you're Jewish, it's not so that you can say, okay, I'm day 8, I'm getting ready to get on with it, but it's to give you place to be able to celebrate that person and to mourn their loss without feeling like you're being a burden on other people, because people are expecting you to do it that time. And then I think at 1 year anniversary, they also have if I recall correctly, it was called something like Yartzai or something like that. At 1 year, they will actually then do the same celebration. And so people develop these types of rituals, I understand, in order to help facilitate the grief process and to give space for that. And the funeral in a lot of American culture is the place, one of the first places that happens. Of course, just dealing with death, and certainly I think with every other type of grief that you have, maybe we should develop certain strategies and put certain things in place that says, hey, for this period of time, and maybe even beyond, I'm going to allow myself the space to feel and to respond the way that I do at this moment.
Yeah, and you're right. There are, different cultures who do it differently. I know in a lot of the Asian communities, they actually honor the loss every year. So it's not just the first year, but every year they do a tribute to, where they have a celebration of the lives that were lost. And so it's going to vary culturally, but it's not even just, again, it doesn't have to be limited to one. It can be something that you incorporate throughout your life. That is up to each individual person. Like, what do I need in order to be able to process this loss? Do I need to take a day where I just remember that person or even my dog? And then, I celebrate them on that day just in remembrance. And for some people, having those specific days are great, but for a lot of people, it's just part of my normal daily process. This person comes to mind, this place comes to mind. I think about it. I may cry a little, I may laugh a little, but I'm just saving space for those memories.
Well, you mentioned that it's a process. Where do people often get hung up on in that process? I mean, I guess first part, what does the process typically look like, and where do a lot of people get hung up on?
So when you're looking at and thinking about like the stages of grief, denial is one of the first ones. Bargaining, especially if somebody is sick and dying, we bargain, Lord, if you let them live, I will do X, Y, and Z. I will be a better person, so we're bargaining, we're trying. And then we get angry, and a lot of people get stuck in the anger and they stay there, because in society, anger is a lot more accepted than sadness. So it's a lot easier for me to be comfortable with somebody who's cussing and huffing and puffing than someone who's crying. And so a lot of people get stuck in the anger part of grief. And then those who make it to sadness, they may experience it. And then there comes the part of acceptance. And that's where I'm developing my new normal. I still miss this person, but I'm able to put a foot in front of each and go through my day and have those memories, and it not just completely wipe me out. But to answer your question, anger is where a lot of people get stuck when they're processing grief, because they don't want to deal with the sadness that's underneath.
And that's interesting, because you said, as the person on the other end of that anger, we know how to deal with that a lot better. Because, someone who's angry at you, you know how to respond quickly back to that. You can respond back in an angry manner and not necessarily feel bad about it.
Right.
But when somebody is crying, it's just like, and they're grieving, you're like, I don't know how to handle that one. And it became really obvious to me in medical school when we first started interviewing patients. You give patients a a bad news. One student that I was with the whole time, he wound up going in to get some information from a patient who had just been diagnosed with diabetes. And she was just fit. I mean, she was having a fit because she had so many other relatives who had diabetes, and she knew what some of the sequelae of diabetes was. And so in that moment right now, she's just like, man, I've lost my life, it feels like, because she's been given this death sentence. And he needed to ask these questions, and I saw how uncomfortable he was about it. And it never occurred to me that people were just that uncomfortable dealing with people's sadness and dealing with people's hurt. Because, as a funeral director, I was doing it all the time. And so I realized, okay, well, maybe this isn't a natural thing for people to have to deal with, to know how to handle somebody who is hurting. I heard another person say, well, he just doesn't know how to comfort me as I grieve. And how does a person then learn how to better accommodate and to interact with a person who is grieving?
I think
or sad, for that matter.
Right. But to answer that question, it kind of, for me, it boils down to understanding that there's a difference between sympathy and empathy. Because most people, when they think of grief, they're like, you have my sympathies. I'm so sorry for your loss. And, what can I do? Right. Sympathy is just, it's feeling for the person. Empathy is feeling with the person. So if I'm empathetic towards you, I can sit with you because I can connect to the pain. It may not be the same loss, but I've experienced the loss. I know what that's like. And I'm okay to sit with you in that. Most people don't go there emotionally because it makes them uncomfortable. So I always say, I had a 15-year-old who illustrated it so beautifully. She was like, yeah, my grandmother died. And every time I went somewhere, people were coming up to me and they're like, oh, she's in a better place. She's not hurting anymore. And I was like, oh, you got a lot of sympathy. She's, yeah, that's crap. I didn't want to hear that. I wanted somebody to say, it sucks. You really loved your grandmother and you wish she was here right now. And I don't know what else to say, but I'm sorry. I'm like, that's empathy. That's what people want. But we don't want to do that because we don't want to connect with our own pain. So we just say, I'm sorry, they're in a better place. They're not hurting anymore. You'll be okay.
My prayers are with you. See you.
Prayers are with you. See you later. Here's some chicken. Now I'm going home.
Well,
wait a minute now. Don't discount the chicken though.
To some degree, people do that because there's you got to move on. And so, that to me is part of that next question, because sometimes moving on is accepting that for that relationship that you're grieving, whatever image that you had is not going to be. Are you going to be okay with that? Or if you lose someone, hey, you're going to have to go through life without that person. And so I'd imagine a lot of people will use the sympathy card versus empathy to try to, in hopes that you can move on. But from your experience, even if they throw in the empathy and say, hey, it sucks, there's still that. So I guess cry or be in pain as long as you need to versus how do we move on from this?
But that's the thing. We're wanting them to move on because it makes us uncomfortable. I can't put a time limit on how long it takes somebody. One person may be fine. They may be like, okay, I love them, but I knew they were gonna be gone. I'm okay after a couple of weeks. Somebody else may not ever. I worked with a woman who her husband had died 6 years before I met her, and she still wore her wedding ring and she still referred to him like he was here. So she was still actively in her grief 6 years later when I met her. I can't tell that lady, oh, you need to be over it by now. That's not for me to say. And if I'm uncomfortable with it, I just have to find a way to, okay, if that's hers, let her have it. And if I can't sit with her, don't placate her. Just give her space.
No, I mean, I understand. I think part of the, concern is if you stay in it, and this is why we have you on, because I agree, you can't tell someone how long, but at the same time, if you recognize there's a situation of depression or there's a situation of an inability to function, I can't tell you how long you can be in that state, but at the same time, you can't move in that state, especially, as Christians, you still have a purpose here. How do we get you out of that?
we have to understand that sometimes we like to commingle grief and depression. We can go through grief, but somebody may then be impacted by depression, right? So now I am unable to get out of bed. I'm unable to function. That's an extension of the grief, because that's where it has now come into depression. So was I somebody who already had depression, but I had managed it before this, and then that pushed me over? So do I now need to look at other ways to help with that? And some people who go through grief may temporarily have to take antidepressants to help them to deal with it and to be able to get back to their normal function. There are grief support groups that people go to that help them, and then also going, for individual or family counseling. So there are things that you can do, but understanding that grief can manifest into a depression for somebody. And that's where people, where what you're talking about, we're like, okay, they can't seem to move on. It's like, yeah, because now the depression has taken over and they're not functioning the way they used to. And so they do need additional support. It's not just the grief, but they now also have to deal with that depression. And this time of year, that can even make it worse, because if you have somebody who suffers from seasonal affective disorder and then they have grief on top of that, yeah, it's a struggle for them. So they may need medication. They may need, counseling or other therapeutic interventions.
So one of the things, and I hear you saying that some people want to get out of the relationship and not out of the relationship, but want to avoid dealing with someone, being empathetic with someone because it makes them uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Some of it is because it makes them uncomfortable on the inside, but part of it is because they're like, I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And I'm fearful.
And for something's going on with Mark's sound. Mark, if you're back on, you mentioned how they are struggling to say the right thing and they're fearful. So would you want to repeat your question?
Yeah, they're struggling to find the right thing and to say, because they don't want to say the wrong thing and that's going to, quote unquote, I guess, tip the person over or send them in a downward spiral here or there. So people walk on eggshells around people who are grieving just simply because they don't know what to say. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that, and again, this might be outdated, but one of the things that we were taught was just say something. And, don't be afraid to say something, because you're probably not going to break them, but just don't say something stupid, though. That's what I think people are worried about, that whatever I say, it's going to come out and be kind of stupid. So I was watching a TikTok video today where a guy was talking about, this is how you get prepared for a really good date. And then he said, have a couple of pocket questions available. And so, if the 5 things that you would, the things that you would, I forgot what the questions were, whatever. But what he was basically saying is, so as the conversation sort of comes to a halt and it fizzles out a little bit, you have something there that stimulates the conversation in a way that says, I want to know more about you. Should you do that same type of thing when interacting with people who are grief? If you don't know what to say, are there certain pocket 5 questions or statements or something that you can say so that you can avoid that awkwardness?
There don't even have to be 5. You can say, I don't know what to say, but I'm here for you. Period. Mm-hmm. You don't have to have a phrase. Mm-hmm. Just, because, I've never lost a parent. Well, I have, but a parent that I was close to. Let me preface it that way. I've lost my biological father, but I was not close to him. So for me, walking with somebody who lost a parent, I don't know what that feels like. And I will say, I don't know what that feels like, but my heart breaks for you. And what can I do for you? There's nothing else that I need to say.
Well, and thanks in that, because I do think people do struggle. Again, we're getting around the holidays. I know I've lost a parent. It took probably a couple of years before, even as I'm around family members, being able to have a Thanksgiving where, okay, what it typically looks like is my dad and my mom are here and all of my family here. And to see that absence, I think for some people, and of course you work with this more than I do, but for some people, it's like, I don't know if I can be happy when the person that partly made this such a celebratory event is not here. And to celebrate when someone's not here can seem, I don't want to say disingenuous, but could seem as if you don't recognize that you've lost the love. But at the same time, again, you've got other family members that don't understand what you're going through, but also want you to be happy in that, hey, I'm here for you. Can you at least see me? And recognize that just because you've lost one person doesn't mean that you've lost everyone. Your family is still here. And so I'd imagine that person that's grieving then has to juggle that balance of, okay, I don't want to make everyone feel bad by, not being receptive to all the love that they're showing me, but at the same time, I'm still trying to transition, just trying to understand what this looks like.
Yeah.
And that can be tough.
Yeah. And sometimes it might be the person who's still grieving, maybe like, you know what? I'm not going to attend this function because I don't want to bring everybody else down. And for those family members to be like, we get it. Okay. We'll bring you a plate. We hear you, you get there and you're like, I'm trying, but you know what? This is hard. To be able to say, this is hard. I'm going to go in another room or I'm going to go home. The challenge is it's not the person who's grieving responsibility to take care of everybody else. But unfortunately, that's what tends to happen.
Yeah.
Everybody else is like, well, Sonia's making me uncomfortable. And it's like, well, how about you think about what Sonia's feeling and ask her how, what can you do for her? But that's again, where we don't want to be uncomfortable. So a lot of times the person who's grieving will, put on a fake smile or a pretend because they recognize, okay, they're uncomfortable because of me. Let me take care of them, even though I'm the one that's really hurting.
Well, and to that point, I don't know if a lot of times people can articulate what you can do for me.
Right. You can't.
And so, if someone is saying, hey, I'm here for you, just let me know. Well, I can't tell you.
Yeah.
And, and in that, I can understand again from both sides. So one person is like, well, I really want you to be of value to you. I want to help you through this. Whereas the other person's like, well, I don't know what to tell you. So either you take it upon yourself to show up and clean my house or whatever it is that you feel like can work, or you wait on me to say something and I may never say it.
Right.
And that can be tough.
And that's why I had a friend who lost 2 of her children. And I remember thinking like, she's going to be overwhelmed with everybody showing up now, like when it happened. And she was, everybody was sending food and everybody was sending gift cards and coming to visit and all these things. And I remember the day of the funeral, I went in my calendar and I put a date a year out and I put send a meal. That's all I put, send a meal in her name a year out. And then on the year anniversary, I sent the DoorDash like, okay, here's some food. And she was like, why'd you do that? And I was like, because I know you're still grieving. She's like, but most people only do that. And I was like, yeah, I wanted to let you know that I'm still thinking about you now, a year later, because your grief hasn't stopped. So if they don't know what to do, okay, do something like that. You know what? Oh, it's been a couple of months. Well, you know what? Let me send a housekeeper to Sonia's house because it hasn't looked like Sonia normally kept it. So let me send somebody over there or let me send her a gift card. So it's, what would you want somebody to do for you? You don't always have to wait for them to tell you what they need. What would you want in that situation?
Well, I want to talk about the two separate because, I will say, even me personally, I've dealt with both. When grieving a relationship, I'd imagine it's really, and you can, again, tell me if I'm wrong, you go through the process, but a lot of it may be, hey, you've got to let go of what it is that you thought, but also you've got to, I guess, to some degree, pivot in hopes that, hey, that doesn't mean that something else isn't better or, but you kind of go through that process of, let's talk about relationships first and we'll talk about the loss of a person. what that process looks like, and maybe some best benefits or practices or whatever that someone can look into in addition to counseling to try to get through it.
So like a breakup of a relationship, you thought y'all were going to be together forever. You break up. Well, yeah, you are going to have that sadness, that loss. But I always tell people, like, start to remember you, take care of you. So start to think back to what are things you enjoy doing, because a lot of times we become used to doing things with that other person. And so maybe what I like has taken a back seat. Well, put it back in the front with you. So self-care, that's a really big part of it. For most of us, it's like doing the small, normal things. Are you eating healthy? Oh, I broke up, so now I'm eating a bag of chips and a tub of ice cream every day. Well, how about you start back eating healthy, eating, 3 to 4 meals a day? Are you exercising? Are you showering? These are things that also look what depression looks like, and that's what can happen. And so it's really just the basic activities of daily living. Can you start to incorporate those in your life? If you tell me I can't even take a shower, then I may say, okay, can you get up and put on a clean pair of pajamas? If you're not going to put on clothes, put on a fresh pair of pajamas. Can you at least wash your face? And then the next day, can you wash your face and brush your teeth? Hopefully you're doing both, but if you can't, can you do those and add one thing each day? What are some other things you can do? Exercising. What are things that help to boost our endorphins? Because that's what helps to quell and bring down that sadness, the depression that we're feeling. And so those are the things that I tell somebody if it's a loss of, a relationship, because they moved across the country and y'all still together, but you don't see each other every day. And so what can I do? Well, start back taking care of yourself, and then start to find ways to be social, even if it's just, okay, I've been watching church online. I'm going to actually go into church and be around people, maybe one Sunday a month, and then I build on it. So for me, when I work with people dealing with any type of loss, we do a lot of work on self-care. Like, what does that look like? How do we reincorporate that? Because oftentimes that gets pushed on the back burner. So if we can reincorporate that, that helps them to begin to go through that process and start healing.
And is that similar with the loss of a individual?
Yes. Yeah. It's because the loss, no matter what, it's I have to learn how to exist without this person, whether physically, because of death, or physically because we're not together anymore and they live across the street and I don't want to see them. So then I might be like, okay, how do we take steps for you to move?
Yeah.
Or things like that. Yeah.
Well, now imagine, because I don't know if you've heard about Keke Palmer, but I'd imagine she's going to have to deal with the loss of her relationship. I don't know if you remember her, but she's an actress that was on Aquila and B and some other things. But I remember probably a couple of months ago, there was a big thing when she went to an Usher concert, right? And her boyfriend at the time, or the father of her child, made a comment about how you dress when you're your mother.
Right.
And so a lot of people rallied around her, but it seemed as if they were working their relationship out. And now we hear that he's been abusing her and she's filed for a temporary restraining order. But even again, because again, I mean, I don't have a child, but I'd imagine there's a level of grief and even having to deal with the loss of man. I never wanted to have a child without both the parents being actively in one household. And now I have to deal with the fact that I cannot have this person who I've elected to have a child with be in the life in the capacity that they're in right now, because they're physically abusive. And so, again, that's why I kind of asked about the process, because I, definitely that one part of getting back to you and that self-care would not, but also I'd imagine there's a guilt there. And hey, you made a decision. This decision isn't working out the way you intend to. And you've got now a child involved that is affected by your decision. And you kind of hit on the nail about, hey, we don't know how long it can take for someone to get through that. But I'd imagine in that circumstance, even knowing that you're parenting by yourself, or knowing that hey, I feel like I've put my child at a disadvantage, you've got to grieve that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do. I mean, she does have to grieve that because it's not the life that she had envisioned. And so she's got to give herself time to figure out now what this new life is going to look like. But
assuming she can let go of, because I mean, a lot of times you hear people go back because they can't figure that out.
And that's, the other component of that is, okay, she was being abused. So now she's got to deal with that trauma because he was unsafe. And how does she deal with that? Right. So she's got complex grief because there's trauma involved. And to her, I would be like, or anybody in that situation, talk to somebody, talk to a professional, because you're going to need more than just, oh, let me, go to the gym today and let me eat 4 meals a day. No, I need somebody to talk to because I need to be able to sometimes get some cognitive tools to help me to function, where we're setting specific goals that I need to meet along this journey that I am now in.
Now, is there any Thanksgiving as part of the process of grief?
Yes, helping them. A lot of times we'll do affirmations. So finding ways to find affirmations for yourself and in order to, when I think about affirmations, I'll say like, okay, something that you experience or that you share with somebody else. So like either they did it for you or you did it for them. And that helps with that gratitude, because then I'm looking at things in a positive lens and focusing on what is helping me versus getting stuck in the sadness or the loss that I'm feeling. So I'm finding and being intentional about focusing on things to be thankful for, things to be grateful for, and ways I can affirm myself and others.
Isn't a part of grief, or at least one of the things that people do after they have lost someone, that they become almost magical thinking. It's not really magical thinking. I forget what the term for it is, but when only thing that they remember are the good things, all the good stuff, and they know they were in an abusive relationship, and they block all these things out of their mind. Is that helpful? Is that a defense mechanism? Is that something that you as a counselor help somebody to start saying, hey, you need to remember these parts of it too? Or do I just forget all about those?
No, that is a defense mechanism, because it's easier to stuff that, those bad memories and just try to remember all the good. You can't force them into it, but that will be something where I would do parts work with them. Like, okay, why are you feeling the need to protect yourself and only focus on the good things? How can we help you to incorporate the negatives in a way that's healthy for you, where you can grow from them and learn from them? But people do that a lot. And those people typically aren't going to be coming into a counselor because they don't want to deal with that. But then something happens and then there's an explosion for them because something hits a nerve and it brings all that negative stuff to the surface, and they don't know what to do with it. So then they lash out at whomever is around, or they internalize it and, beat themselves up. Why did I stay? Why did I keep up, dealing with this? So that's where talking to a counselor, because we call it magical thinking too. That magical thinking can keep people stuck.
Mm-hmm. And so another form of magical thinking, which I really am very critical of the church for, is a song that just came out. Why should I be discouraged? Why should the shadows come?
That and just so you said,
that's a song that I can hear my Aunt Maddie singing. Oh, so you remember the words now, huh? But it's one of the things that's dangerous about religion is because we expect that our faith is supposed to fix everything, the entire human condition and the whole human experience, not fix it, but really magically remove us from that situation. That all I'm supposed to do is sing because I'm happy, I sing because I'm free. No, you are still a human being living a human experience. Donna Lawrence said you're a spiritual being living a human experience, and not just a human living a spiritual experience. And so But we are still humans. And so as a result, we have to, in the church, I don't think we give each other the space that we need to have, whether it's the church doing it themselves or we doing it, or we're doing it to ourselves, where we don't afford ourselves the space to be able to grieve.
Yeah.
And to feel sad.
Yeah, that's the soapbox I get on a lot, because I'm like, okay, here we go. You know what? Jesus was sad. We didn't tell him to stop because he should have faith. Jesus was sad. If Jesus can be sad, what makes you think we can't be? But we do. We very much over spiritualize and minimize the impact of emotions. Because if you just had faith, that wouldn't happen. And I was at a conference. I can't think of the guy's name. He's part of Mercy Me, and or he made the song Mercy Me. And he was talking about some lady came up to him and his wife and was like, I've been praying for your son. He's going to be healed of his juvenile diabetes. And he said in that moment, he realized, no, he's not. My son is going to have this for the rest of his life. God's answer was no. And that's okay. Mm-hmm. I have to learn how to deal with it, and I have to help my son. And that's what we all have to do. It's like, it's not always going to be a smile and a happy. But again, it's because it makes us uncomfortable. So we just tell them, just sing and you'll be okay. And no, I'm not. Singing ain't going to make me okay today.
But do you think that spirituality is an important part of grieving? Because I often wonder, how do people who don't have a spiritual foundation, how do they even make it through some of these things? Yeah. And so there has to be a healthy balance where you say, well, yeah, it has its place, but it needs to be used properly. How does spirituality then fit into the grieving process healthily?
Just that is like, you have a place of comfort to go to. It's not a physical place maybe, but like you can cry out to Jesus, and you can cry out to the Lord. And so, it's just, that's part of, for me, that's a natural part of the grieving process, even for those who say they're unbelievers, because they often will cry out. They may not call to God, but they're like, I just need help. Universe, send something. So whatever, they're still finding a way to cry out and look to something that they can't see, something that's not tangible, to help them with the pain that they're feeling. So the spiritual part is a big component of grief. It's just, do we utilize it? And do we utilize it in a healthy way, not to make somebody feel bad because of where they are, but to encourage them that it's okay, and there's light on the other side.
And not to make ourselves feel bad because we're a certain kind of way. I watched my mother after the death of my father. My mother was a tremendous, woman of faith and evangelist. She could win some people to Christ, but I watched her struggle, because she would have moments when she would get sad, and everything within her said, why am I sad? Because, I've got everything that the Lord blessed me with. I've got, healthy children and such. You lost your husband, who you've been married to for 25 years. You have to allow yourself that space. And I understand that God prepared you for this moment, and he gave you the advance warning about it was going to happen. Yeah, that's important. Those are things that we can celebrate, but you still have to allow yourself, woman of God, man of God, still have to allow yourself that space to be human. And I guess when you said Jesus wept, they say, yeah, but that was the shortest verse in the Bible. So your weeping should be short too. That's how we want to do it.
Like that verse was short, but that didn't mean his time crying was short.
Exactly.
So, yeah. But yeah, we do. We have to allow ourselves that space. But that's where, we substitute religion for relationship. My religion tells me that I should just lean on my faith and I'll be okay. My relationship with God tells me that he's okay if I'm still crying and I'm sad over the loss of my husband or my wife or my son or my daughter or whomever it might be.
is that a trap then to also say, well, I want to lean on God. He knows me. I have a high priest who can be touched by the feeling of my infirmities. And so I'll just relay it all on God, and I don't really need the people around me to do it. So I get it, that I do think that people do need to have a spirit, or I think it's helpful to have a spiritual foundation as you navigate grief. At least for me, it was helpful for that. But I think it's also helpful to realize that,
You
you
need
need some
people.
human too. You need
Yeah.
people.
You need people.
Most
And
important things are relationships. Which
Yep.
I was going to ask, like, how do you discern when you're deflecting? Because I know a lot of people may use work, or may use, a spouse, or may use, other avenues to deflect or to avoid the grieving process. So how do you recognize that you're deflecting your grief?
Some people don't, that again, that's going to be on an individual basis. And so do you have somebody that will check you? Like, okay, you really throwing yourself into work right now, to try to avoid your feelings. So that's where having the people and not just relying on the spiritual is helpful, because you might not realize that you're doing it, because to you, this is just how I'm getting through. But somebody else close to you who's able to say, hey, I noticed you went from working 40 hours a week to working 80 since your loss. You need to slow down.
Well,
So
it's so hard, because we just talked about earlier about, hey, I can't tell you how to grieve, or I can't
that's not telling
tell
them
you
how
how
to
long,
grieve.
or I
That's
can't, necessarily empathize per se, but to say that may seem your lack of empathy, I guess.
No, you are attuned to them, letting them know you see. I know you're still hurting and you're throwing yourself in. Are you allowing yourself to grieve, or are you putting it in a door, shutting it, and focusing on work? That's accountability. We need that. And
but
that's
we don't want it.
There's no linear answer.
Or I mean, and I don't know if we don't want it, or if it's like, this is how I'm trying to move on. And because I know a lot of people will say, well, I don't want to be in a corner crying, or I don't want to dwell on the fact that I've lost something. And so they've used that as a process to try to figure out their normal without, to some degree, I guess what you're saying, without recognizing that, hey, you're delaying your grief. I mean, I don't know if that's what you're doing or not, but that's why I asked, how can you be able to check someone and say, hey, because if someone's doing it as part of their process, and that's their process, but if someone is doing to deflect, then you may want to call them out on it.
And there's not one answer for every person. It's different for individuals. So again, if I know you, Sonia, and I'm like, okay, she throwing herself into work because she's trying to avoid this, and we have a relationship where I can say that to you, I'm going to say it, because the other side of you throwing yourself into is you're going to burn out eventually. So you're going to have to face that grief, and it's going to be compounded because now you're extremely exhausted on top of it. But for others, they might have to hit that wall. So there's not one answer that's going to suffice for everybody. It's going to be different. Everybody's grief journey is different.
So how do I know that I'm navigating my grief journey in a healthy way?
Well, as part of that is, am I talking about it? Am I, not with everybody, but am I able to share the pain that I'm experiencing, or the hurt, with somebody, a sibling, another family member, a close friend? Am I able to talk about it? Am I getting help for it? Am I going to a counselor? Am I going to a grief support group? Am I leaning on people at my church or in my community? Those are the steps that I can look for. The people who kind of shut themselves off, they're probably not doing it in a healthy way, because they're isolating.
Can you talk to us a little bit about anticipatory grief and how that process is, and the pros and cons of it, and if it's something that we intentionally do, or is it something that we subconsciously do?
So I don't think it's
maybe I'll define what I'm talking about in terms of anticipatory grief. You have a chronic illness, a person who's chronically ill, and dealing with that, and that person is terminally ill. But while that person is alive, you wind up going through those same stages of grief: the denial, the anger, the bargaining, the anger, the sadness, and eventually the acceptance. And then that person dies. And you're like, what am I supposed to do? For some reason, I feel relieved that this person is dead. And now I feel, because truly a burden has been lifted off of me. Nobody will ever describe it that way. But when you're caring for a terminally ill person, and now that person is gone, you do somehow feel a relief of the burden that was on you before. And you can even feel guilty about that. And then when you're not, after that moment in time when they have died, you're not feeling the denial. You're not doing the bargaining, the anger. And you're like, what's wrong with me? Because I just lost this person. I should be grieving. And right now I feel relieved. Something's wrong with me.
The funny thing to answer that question, man, God must have knew that I was going to be talking to y'all this week, because I had these questions in sessions this week. It's like the person who grieved, the anticipatory person, they're not walking around feeling guilty. It's their people who are close to them who are mad at them. Like, what do you mean you ready to date already? My mom just died a month ago. How you ready to date? I'm like, well, he's been grieving since she first got diagnosed with cancer 10 years ago. So he's past that. So they usually aren't the ones dealing with grief. It's the guilt. It's the family and friends around them who can't understand, how did you get over this so quickly? Because they're not thinking about the fact that that person started grieving that loss a long time ago. Whereas most of us are in that hopeful, okay, we're still hoping and hoping and hoping that we're not going to lose this person. And so when we lose them, then it becomes real. But it was real for them 10 years ago. So they're not feeling guilty, but they getting all kind of backlash from the people around them who are now mad at them because they're at a different stage in their grief process. They're at acceptance, where we're all back at the beginning stage.
So it sounds like you're saying when there's an anticipatory grief, your process ends sooner than once the loss actually occurs.
Yeah, because you've been going through that process while that person was still with you.
Yeah, you realize that person is going to be gone. And unfortunately, I think some people, when they're in their marriages, they anticipate the breakup as well.
I think that happens a lot.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah.
It was once said
women tend to have that anticipatory.
I agree. I call it my suitcase theory. I think people start putting away things. Yeah. They start packing long before the moment to leave is. And so when it's the time for them to leave, they're like, listen, I've got my suitcase already packed up. I'm ready to walk out. I don't have second thoughts about it. Right. I've already gone through all of the bargaining and everything that I'm going to try to do. I had my sad moment. Now I'm accepting it. And every day you come home and you act a butt fool, then I'm like, okay.
You add one more item to the suitcase.
One more item to the suitcase.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot I need my bikini. That's what it is. Yeah.
Yep.
But that's unfortunately, it's the human psyche is just so complex, and how we respond to things. Like you said, no one answer and everything will fit for each person, because each person has a different set of experiences and have a past, present, and even, well, they don't know their future ones, but they have past and present experiences that are different from each person, and each one of those experiences impact them differently. I remember my father and brother died in a boating accident, and my cousin was saying, she had a harder time dealing with the grief of my father than she had dealing with the grief of her own father, who had cancer and had a long, protracted course. But it was, she was baffled by that. She was like, why would I be, hurt more about, or grieve harder? I guess the way that she interprets it, that she grieved harder for the death of my father. And so I guess the timing of the loss sometimes makes a difference in how you grieve as well, whether it's an abrupt, sudden loss or whether it's a gradual loss over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. An abrupt loss, that's that shock, right? We're in the disbelief, the denial. We can't believe that happened. So yeah, that's going to hit harder than watching and knowing this person is gradually getting worse. So yeah, the shock when there's a sudden death like that, unexpected, yeah, that's going to hit, and you stay in that denial, that disbelief phase for a good little bit before you start to move on to the anger and the sadness and the acceptance.
So in our last couple of minutes here on the show, and I so appreciate everything that you shared here, can you give us some tools? We're coming up on Thanksgiving and Christmas. These are difficult times for people to deal with loss. Can you give those our viewers who may be watching this and who are dealing with that first Christmas without their mother, or that first Christmas after the death of their child, or Thanksgiving and you're divorced and now you're no longer together as a family around the Thanksgiving dinner table after 20 years? What are some of the things that I should do as a person who is now approaching this season?
Do what feels best for you. Don't try to recreate what you had. You know, for a lot of people, the traditional dinner might be a trigger. That might be hard. So you know what? If you got to make spaghetti, make spaghetti. If you want to forego the family gathering this year because I don't want to sit there and have to smile, stay home. Really, the most important thing, especially, you know, during this time of year, is to take care of yourself and be selfish. And that's, you know, we always say, you don't be selfish, take care of everybody else. No, be selfish. If you need to take space and be home, take space and be home. If you want to do something totally different and go away, go away. Give yourself.
Well, and I guess, and on that, because I'd imagine to some degree there's this conundrum of, you know, should I be isolated by myself and sink into whatever, you know, feeling of sadness or whatever, or should I go be around family? And if to your point, if there's some questions to ask yourself, and if you're saying no, then perhaps you should stay home. Or if you're saying, you know, yes, then maybe you should try to embrace your family. What would be, I guess, a way to check yourself to see if you are ready to be.
Can I get out of bed? Can I get up and put on clothes? Can I drive over there? You know what? Or can I make a phone call and say, hey, I ain't gonna make it today and I'm struggling? Because at least then they know we need to check in on her.
Mm-hmm. Do I want to? Even for this other question is, can I? And then I guess, do I want to?
I want to.
And if the answer to that, do I want to? I really don't feel like it. And I guess I'm hearing you saying this is a time when you give yourself permission to
show yourself.
Yeah, show yourself grace and say, yeah, I'm not on it right now. And maybe it would be good to have a trusted person who you can tell them, I'm just not feeling it right now. And I like how you said that, because it allows them it gives them that space to let them know that, okay, this thing is still real for you. And then maybe at some point we should check in on you. Hopefully the astute person who hears that will do that. One of the things I always tell people when they're grieving through something is to say, call me at any time.
Mm-hmm.
It could be 3:00 in the morning, and when you call me at 3:00 in the morning, I'm going to look at that and I'm going to answer the phone like I've been wide awake. And because I don't want you to, because if you had the courage to pick up the phone and call me at 3:00 in the morning, you had to overcome something in your mind that says, I don't want to be a burden to this person. I don't want to pick up, yeah, hello, and then confirm that you were really a burden at that moment. So, hey, what's going on?
Yeah.
So I'm going to answer the phone. The reason why I say that is only from having dealt with my own grief process, where it was that 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and you have that whole situation where, man, I am in a place I've never been in. I don't want to obviously burden somebody at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I know what that feels like. I can empathize with that. Mm-hmm. And for that reason, that's why I tell people, when you're going through it, hey, call me. It doesn't matter what time. And nobody ever takes you up on that. But I think maybe just knowing that you got somebody to call is sufficient. So if you got that person who you can tell, hey, I'm not feeling it right now, there is a responsibility, hopefully, that you will have to check in on that person still, and to give that person a place to call you and to be where they are in their process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I do want to encourage those that if you do have that person, please be thankful.
Yes.
Because again, like I get that you can easily dwell on your loss and feel like I don't want to figure out how to move on without this person, or I don't want to figure out how to start over in a new relationship. Yeah, and I just want to make sure, yes, definitely grieve, get help or whatnot. But if you choose not to and you're going through this season, find something to be able to still say, but I'm thankful that I have X, whatever that is.
Amen. and all, by all means, if you see that this is starting to really impact your life, or if other people around you see that it's impacting your life, get some professional help. And maybe you don't even have to wait until it's impacting your life or something like that. Get some professional help. And Sonona, you'd be a great person to do that with. And so if someone is in, you guys are doing stuff now telemedicine wise, though, right? Telephonically or.
Yeah, we still see some. We are mainly in person, but I have one day where I just do nothing but see clients telehealth. So yeah.
Okay. Well, good. Well, thanks so much for joining us on the Roundtable Consult. It's always a pleasure to have you on here. We learn so much every time you come as well. So we wish you a happy Thanksgiving and Merry Christmas and all that other stuff as well. So.
Well, thank y'all for having me, and same to you. Happy Thanksgiving, Merry Christmas.
Yes. Okay. Well, you got big plans for Thanksgiving though?
I don't know about big plans. It's the usual plans. I spend them with my mom.
Okay.
And because I can't. To me, there's no Thanksgiving unless I have her dressing.
Okay. Okay. Well, you might want to start anticipating at some point you're going to have a Thanksgiving without her dressing.
I got to learn how to make it so that her dressing lives on even if she's not physically here to do it.
Exactly. Well, good. Well, we'll be up in Columbus with our son and his wife, so we'll be looking forward to that.
Oh, good to know.
Yes.
Well, I hope our viewers definitely let us know what you guys are doing for Thanksgiving. I'd love to hear how you're going to spend the holiday season. We're here every Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. Also, catch us on your favorite podcast platform. Catch some of those old episodes and let us know what you think. We have all the episodes right here on Facebook, but we also have them on YouTube. So go check us out on YouTube as well. So until next Saturday, thank you so much for tuning in and have a great week.